Juraj Slafkovsky was disrespected on a recent Athletic article saying that he was one of the least hyped, in fact, the least hyped number one overall pick in the last 10 years. We have some bones to pick with that. Plus, a new contract signed by a young defenseman in Chicago sets a potentially concerning precedent for Montreal heading forward, or maybe a great precedent depending on how you feel about it. And finally, a note on Oliver Kapanen and some pretty great stuff he's been doing as of late. So you're going to want to stick around for all of that coming up on this episode of Habs Digest. But guys, I sometimes remind you of this, but over half of you watching this video are not subscribed. And hey, if you want daily Montreal Canadiens content, this is the spot to be. We're going to have videos all the time, live streams for the draft lotto, all this stuff into the summer. We hope you guys stick around with us. Jesse, the first thing I wanted to talk about today is Oliver Kapanen. Now, he's a prospect we've talked about a good bit recently, and just to highlight some of his recent performances, don't forget, he had a 14-point playoff showing. He just turned 20 last July, 14 points in a liga where it's not often that a player 20 and younger puts out that kind of point production in the regular season, let alone the playoffs. 34 points in 51 regular season games, 14 points in 13 playoff games. And Grant McCagg today tweeted, Oliver Kapanen has centered Finland's first line the past 2 days in exhibition games versus Sweden. No points in those two matches, but the Finns didn't surrender a goal. Oliver Kapanen is one of those guys, Jesse, that's kind of an all-around player, but that offensive upside is something we almost didn't expect to flash in those playoffs. So for him coming into Laval next year, I feel like getting that top line experience, a guy that was formerly a captain for a World Junior team, I feel like he's showing almost more of those all-around attributes, more of those NHL level attributes than I expected, especially starting out this season.
Yeah, nice to see him just continuing to play hockey right after his normal season finished, right? But you have to feel with Oliver Kapanen, he's probably projected to be more of a bottom six, maybe a third line sort of player for the Montreal Canadiens if all things go well. Right. So if you're playing in that type of position, of course, you need to have a solid defensive game as well, really rounding it out. While we know that he can, play really well offensively, as we've seen this year, just kind of proving to have that all-around game and really find his skill set to be able to adapt to the North American game and really find his position within this organization is going to be very key.
I think that's a big thing, right? That transition from, we always see it, European ice and North American ice. I'm sure there are ways to figure out how certain players with certain styles are going to translate. With him, maybe it's a bit of a question mark, but regardless, just wanted to fill you guys in on that because we thought it was a pretty awesome note for one of those underhyped, underrated Habs prospects. But we're going to move on to the meat of this video. And Jesse, we got to talk about something. Now, there was a contract signed today in Chicago, and well, it seems to have pretty big implications for Kaiden Guhle. As Vlasic on Chicago, I believe it's Alex Vlasic, I hope I don't get that wrong, signed a 6-year extension with a $4.6 million cap hit. Now, Vlasic, his teammates have gushed about him being one of the most underrated players on their roster, maybe even in the league, and he should get some more league-wide respect, even if he has been getting some more as of late, but his numbers, well, they're not amazing. Now, again, he's very solid defensively. He's 6'6", 217. He's a decent shutdown guy as well, but he had 16 points in 76 games. But then if you compare that to Kaiden Guhle, well, he's put up some decent points. This year may be a bit of a down year, but 18 points in 44 games. Now, hold with me here, because there's something else I wanted to show you. A lot of people are saying that could be comparable. They're very similar age. Don't forget about Jake Sanderson, a guy who in 2022-23 put out a very similar point per game production to Kaiden Guhle, and he signed a massive 8-year, $64.4 million contract at the end of that season. Kaiden Guhle's due for an extension this offseason, Jesse. Do you see him being closer to that 6-year, $5 million mark of Vlasic, or do you see him more towards that 8-year, $8 million mark? What would you give him? Because that's kind of a big range, but I think these two set the tone for him to be probably towards that upper range, which might be scary for some Habs fans.
Probably more of the 5 million range. And, I think it would be wise, even though you want to give out the longer ones, not to go the 8 right away, go the 6 with Kaiden Guhle, even though we know we want him kind of for that long term. I think you definitely still need to be careful. You want that long term, but as much as possible, limiting that term until we know. Now, we know with Kaiden Guhle, we want him to be a top pairing guy for this team. We know how important it is. He's a young leader on this team, very instrumental to this entire organization. So for sure, there's lots of value there. We want him there for the long term, but I feel like that sweet spot of getting the long term, but without kind of selling the farm would be the best here.
8 million's a lot of money. Now, Now, Kaiden Guhle, again, has that point-producing potential, and he had a good year this year, but he was also on his offside, so you have to wonder how much that might run into his contract, right? Like, he played great alongside Mike Matheson, but his point production maybe wasn't where you'd expect it to be with him playing a good amount of games there with Matheson. But the thing with Guhle is he was so good defensively this year, Jesse, but also surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly to those of you who actually follow Kaiden Guhle, he was one of the fastest defensemen in the league. He had some of the, he was up there in the top 10 for most 20 mile per hour plus skating bursts in the entire league for defensemen. So when we're talking about a Kaiden Guhle deal, like, yeah, you got the 6 million, you got the 5 million, you got the 8 million, you got the 6 year, you got the 8 year. Do you think that maybe it's a blessing in disguise that him playing a bit of offside with Mike Matheson and his numbers going down, do you think that might help the Habs in negotiations? Or do you think that's maybe more Guhle saying, hey, look, I'm super versatile. You got to give me a bit more because I can fill out any need on your team?
I think it'll be all right in the watch. I think they're definitely going to look to do right by Kaiden Guhle. They understand his value, kind of getting back into more on that left side, and obviously a very young defenseman as he continues. His defensive game is going to improve, but also his offense, which is there as well, right? So really, he is so valued by this organization for so many reasons. So you have to feel like Kent is going to do well. I could see 5.5 sort of range, at least maybe for right now. But Josh, would you go for the 6 years or are you going for more of an 8-year type of deal?
For me, I guess it depends, right? It depends on the number. I feel like 8x8 for Guhle to me seems too scary. But I think if we signed him to a 6-year deal at $5 million, that would be an absolute bargain. I think he's better than Vlasic. I think he's about as good as Sanderson, but I think that much money's a bit scary. So I think if you can get him at 8 years for closer to that 6 million range, I would pull the trigger. But if it's 6 years, maybe you might have to give him a bit more. Let us know what you guys think down below. I think an 8 years, somewhere around that $6 million range could be good. But hey, there are a bunch of different ways Kent and management could go with this. Final topic though, Jesse. We got a bit of Slaf talk. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this Corey Pronman article, or Matthias Brunet posted this as well. There's a lot of people talking about recent rankings in an article from The Athletic, where Corey Pronman went through the recent last 10 number 1 overall picks, and he asked people to rank them based on the level of hype heading into the draft. 6 NHL scouts and executives were polled for this list. They were asked to rank the players from the perspective of what they thought of the prospects in their draft years. And that's key because it's hard to control 100% given the information we've gotten. 6 voters were chosen instead of an odd number of 5 because Celebrini was tied with Jack Hughes after the initial 5-voter survey. So where did Juraj Slafkovsky rank? Absolutely dead last, with 4 people voting him 10th out of 10, with 2 people voting him 9th out of 10. They say he was divisive because the 2022 draft lacked a clear number 1 prospect. Even the scouts who had Slaf as their number 1 prospect say he would not get them overly excited with that pick. I think Montreal disagrees with this. I think if you polled a Montreal scout, they would have had Slaf maybe even higher up the list. That potential he flashed in those Olympics, scoring those 7 goals, was unbelievable. And yes, I know there are some amazing number 1 overall picks. We got Bedard, like Austin Matthews. You got, right now this year, Macklin Celebrini. And I get at the same time some people saying, oh, Slaf in this year's draft might be barely in the top 5. But you gotta realize, Montreal picked him number 1 for a reason. If Shane Wright was picked number 1, his hype heading in, he'd be, probably higher. I don't think this revisionist history of, well, there wasn't really a clear number 1. Yeah, there kind of wasn't, but I think most people thought it would be right. Am I crazy for that, Jesse? I feel like he deserves at least a bit more respect.
No, for sure. And Kent Hughes, I think, deserves even more credit and respect just for the fact that they were able to get this pick while maybe not having that sample size of seeing him kind of play with the men and everything else, and still being able to know that this would be a great hockey player, right? But I think he was a late riser at the draft, and that's all what matters, is getting it right on that day, right? And I think he's going to be a late riser up this list as well. Anything that we learn from following prospects is to be patient. With all these players, on this list, there's going to be some fluctuation there, but honestly, I believe in our boy Slaf to end up being one of the better players on this list, this very elite list, by the time his career is over.
For sure. I mean, there's so many things that go into this, and hey, hype, just on ice hype, could you make an argument? I suppose. I guess it's not often late risers end up shooting all the way to number 1, catching people by surprise, but hey, usually they get picked a little bit lower. But the thing with Slaf is that the right people had hype for him. The right people saw what he had to offer, and those right people drafted him. Give us some Slaf love in the comments. I mean, I unbelievable. I don't even, based on the math, I'm pretty sure it's not even possible anyone even put him 8th. So let's give some love to Slaf. How hyped were you before him in the draft? To be honest, I guess we weren't at that level of hype as some of these other guys. But hey, you know what? It's always good to share some Slafzilla love down in the comments below. But that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, guys, for all the latest Habs news, rumors, reports. This is the spot to be. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.